this is, I'm this, oh, what, let me get my mind again. I was saying I look at the news occasionally. You know, it's an absolute cliche to say that, this is unprecedented times. Dana Anderson, who many of you know at the present moment, is sharing the house with me, as well as Keisha Babette. She's trying to get back to Italy, but we're in the adventure of her doing that. Her humor came up yesterday was, if the year 2020 were a math problem, it would be like, the math problem would be, you're floating down the river in a canoe going 3 miles an hour and one of the wheels falls off. How much pancake batter will it take to reshingle your roof? Which I thought just about sort of sums up like how much we know about what's going on and where we're going and how illogical pretty much everything that we're dealing with is. The only confidence that we all have, which is like all the confidence in the world, is that nothing like this could happen by human agency, and that every human being is being moved by a cosmic force, and that there is a cosmic plan unfolding here. We can put Babaji and Master in that position. We can think about it any way we want to think about it. But fortunately, we're not the doer. I don't, however, always find that is sufficient to keep anxiety at bay. And just watching, and all of you know about this too, of course, what the incredible thing that happened in Beirut a few days ago, really. How could we not know that? Just stunning, sudden Holocaust. And I, as I said, I sort of pick up news, just bits and pieces. So the only real part of it I saw was some woman in her wedding clothes taking a photograph, and then the explosion started, and all of a sudden she was somewhere else. I heard later that woman in her wedding dress was a doctor, and without changing her clothes, she just started attending to many people who were hurt. What that represented to me was a confirmation of a small article that I have always had on hand from Master, which he wrote in 1935 or 39, something like that, between the First and Second World War. And he was talking about how one event causes another. And he talked about the suffering of World War I is what brought on the Spanish flu, because it created a dissonant vibration in the cosmos. And then he talked about how all of that suffering gave man an aversion to suffering and to war for a while. And then the dark force started pushing again, and he talked about Libya and Italy or Ethiopia. I don't even remember all the details. And then he talked about hurricanes being related to all of it. And just one dissonant thought leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, which is that the world is happening on a level of vibration, and that the material expression of vibration is the last rather than the first. That the vibrations are building up for a long time before they begin to express. I mean, this is in a sense like self-realization 101, causal astral material plane. But I can speak for myself, having been a serious student of these teachings for, well, more than 50 years, actually, that the difference between being able to think about it and even to articulate it as I can, and having my subconscious self not flinch is really quite something different. I was very moved in the story of the book, The Hiding Place, where Corrie ten Boom, who was this deeply devout Christian lady in a deeply devout Christian family, where they became quite involved in saving Jews during the Second World War when the Nazis occupied the Netherlands. And eventually she and her older sister and her father, and actually others of their family, were all arrested and put in concentration camps, and much of her family died. She survived, but her sister and her father didn't. And they mostly moved Jews into hiding places, but those that were too Semitic looking and therefore too hard to conceal, they just kept in their own home. So they had like 6 or 7 or 8 people hiding in their house. And if they'd been discovered, they would have been arrested, which eventually they were betrayed, and therefore they were. But they built a hiding place, which is where the name of the book comes from, where the house was a funny shape, so they were able to put in a false wall, and all 8 of their house guests could crawl in there in a matter of less than a minute. But Corrie herself had to practice, because she was apparently, she said, a very deep sleeper. And when she woke up out of subconsciousness, she was often quite confused. And the Nazis often did their raids in the middle of the night because, of course, everybody would be asleep and people would be not in hiding. So they had to practice waking her up in the middle of the night and starting to yell at her, "Where are the Jews? Where are the Jews?" like this. And her nephew took it upon himself. And just night after night, they would just crash in on her, wake her up, and shout that question at her, because every time they shouted it, she would say, "Behind the false wall, right here," because she couldn't get her conscious and her subconscious mind attuned to each other. She just would say what was the truth. And I've always remembered that, because I often think to myself, when I'm startled out of my normal semi-conscious state, whether I'm actually asleep or what I'm doing, and somebody shouts at me, "What do you think is real?" It's very interesting to me what I answer, which is to say, am I calm or do I panic? When there was an earthquake here, and I have to say it was 30 years ago, I don't know if I'd be different now, and it was 1989. I was sitting in the apartment that I lived in at the time. The building began to shake. We live in California, and I knew what earthquakes were. We'd actually occasionally had them even in Ananda Village. But this was bigger and more notable. The house, was a 2-story wooden apartment place where I was. I was on the ground floor. The building begins to move like this. My automatic natural thought is, the building is moving, I need to get out of the building. So because it was just a small place, I just ran right out, and I ran into the middle of the courtyard. But golly, it wasn't the building that was moving, it was the earth that was moving. And it's just, I don't know if you've ever been in earthquakes. They're really quite amazing, because we have a very deep-seated expectation that the earth will not move. I mean, the earth will not ripple like that. So it was rippling, and the trees were swaying, and all of this. And my first thought was not, "Oh, Om Guru, Lord, whatever you want." I think I was screaming. That's what I sort of remember. At least I was yowling in some sense. Other people told me later, truthfully or not, "Oh, my thoughts went to God." My thoughts did not go to God. My thoughts went to the fact that my world had crashed around me. And the first thing I thought of was not, "Oh, let me surrender to God." It was an exceedingly sobering experience. And I mean, now it's 30 some years later, and we're trying to figure out how much pancake batter it's going to take to reshingle the roof. I mean, there's no rational way. We can't reason our way out of this. And we can't just sort of comfort ourselves with the past, because there's no past to relate to this, except that forever, Swami Kriyananda and Master have told us that the likelihood of it being business as usual to the end of our lives was not great. I mean, Swami Kriyananda left the planet before the planet really went into a nosedive, and it still hasn't gone into a nosedive. It's having an enormous hiccup at the moment. We don't know whether it's a cough, or whether it's whooping cough, or just a small spring allergy. We just don't know which one it is at this point. But it's a good exercise. It's a good exercise in the really simple question: where does our security come from? And what makes me feel safe? And of course, we can make practical decisions on the basis of that because we can try to guess, secure our homes, secure our finances, secure our creativity. But the question really that everybody's having to ask themselves right now is what makes me feel safe? Because we just have no idea what's going to come to us tomorrow. And that's always the case. It's just now it's more dramatic. So the whole idea of what does it mean to be part of Ananda, who are we? What is our community? We all of our usual ways, or many of our usual ways, we don't get to see each other. I've been in this community for 30 some years. I know lots of people. Every so often, a name will just cross my mind, and I'll realize I haven't had any. It would be somebody that I would have seen usually like a couple of times a week. I haven't seen them in 4 or 5 months or spoken to them. I don't feel separated from them. But our usual ways of being connected are definitely not there. And we're all being asked to be more than we were, not only for our own sanity, but all of the aberrations that are happening are all emanating, they're manifesting on the material plane, but they're all emanating from the causal plane. I mean, just thinking of Beirut, which was very far away from most of us, although the planet being what it is. Dana Anderson, one of her students was going to come to Assisi if Dana can ever get to Italy to take a class. She lived in Beirut and half her house was destroyed. I mean, so it's just a few degrees of separation, but still, but why did it blow right now? After sitting there for such a long time, it's because somewhere on the causal and then the astral plane, dissonant vibrations have started. So dissonant vibrations are really our enemy at this point. And what we're all really being asked to do is to be who Swami was, really. Swamiji's inner consciousness, no matter what he had to deal with, it was always serene. He often said, I never allow anything to interrupt my inner peace. And I've been looking at myself. They say that we have two diseases going on right now. One is COVID-19 and the other is COVID-19 fatigue, which is just the realization. And I've had to accept, and maybe you all have had to accept this too. I actually sort of hit the wall last week when I just realized that I have no idea what's going to come next. And I've been just holding in my heart the idea that I was going to get something back that I used to have. And it'd be lovely if I do. I mean, the life that we've had here is absolutely wonderful. I'm not trying to get away from it. But what has impressed me is the degree to which I'm living in the future, living in the past and in the future. And I don't want to exaggerate because it's not like a severe fault in me. But the capacity really to accept the now is a very interesting reality with all its insecurity. In the Festival of Light, the little bird, flaps around and thinks it's really powerful, and then the winds come up and it gets battered and it really doesn't like being flapped around in the wind. So then the wind suggests that it surrender to the wind. And then it does, and then it finds that the wind can help, and it flies above the clouds. But then it gets dark. And I've been, conducting the Festival of Light for decades now, and I find every single time I read it, it strikes me again, especially that part. It gets dark, and the little bird asks, how can I fly in this darkness? And what that means to me is I can cope as long as I can see where I'm going. In other words, if I can keep a modicum of control over this, then I'll be fine. But what happens when it goes dark in front of us and we can't keep even that modicum of control? And that's when surrender to me, the dark says, peace awaits you in the unknown. And I've personally found it to be just an extremely interesting meditation, an extremely interesting introspection to feel a kind of habitual level of tension. Just, they're just kind of like, I think of it as normal. Habitual level of tension that's just based on, I don't quite want to surrender to the dark. If I really surrender to the dark, meaning just put my life completely in God's hands without keeping, my hand, one hand, he has one hand on the steering wheel, but so do I. He has one of the pedals and I have the other one. I don't know whether he has the gas or I have the brake. I'm not quite sure which is which. Maybe we keep switching around. But what level of surrender, dynamic surrender, not passive, but dynamic surrender is possible? And how can we help each other? How can we help each other without seeing each other in the way that we always used to, or at least often used to? What does it mean to stay connected? And why were we born at this particular time? Why were our children growing up in this particular atmosphere? No one makes mistakes. And what can we do to use this time? I was remembering that Swami remarked about the Nazi concentration camps, which, there's a lot of horrific things going on the planet. Historically, that one looms large, but there's a lot of other things going on. But Swami remarked that many people became saints through that experience. And I was just meditating on that this morning. Many people became saints through that experience. Who would want that experience? And yet we're always asking God to make us free. So there's a kind of contradiction going on inside of us, isn't it? We know, Lord, I want only thee, Lord, thee, only thee. That's a chant that I love, but not always. Sometimes my subconscious fights with me when I sing that one and just tries to throw up a list of all the other things I want and sort of, accuses me of being a hypocrite. And you can't really quite sing, I want to want only thee, Lord, thee, only thee. I want to want only thee, Lord. It doesn't fit the rhythm of the song. We have to write a new melody. So I have to kind of sometimes tell Divine Mother, well, you know what I mean when I sing this one. But what an opportunity we've been given. And the question is, do we outlast it or do we drink it to the bottom? Sometimes when we're in difficult situations, we think that we conquer them, but we don't really conquer them, we just outlast them. That the wave comes, and over time, whatever has caused, whatever has stricken us, whether it's disappointment or illness or the death of someone we love or displacement, there's lots of lists. And at first it's unbearable, but then time passes, and it isn't as if the pain of that grief actually has changed. It's just that more current preoccupations come in front of it, so it becomes less vivid. But it isn't necessarily resolved. We've simply outlasted it. So opportunities like the one we're in, which is actually every single day of our life, it's just a little more dramatic now, is like, are we outlasting the things that frighten us? Or are we actually overcoming the things that frighten us? And I mean, I'm sharing with you basically my current thoughts, because I've been going up and down a lot. I'm quite sequestered because basically my community controls me at this point. I chafed against it because my temperament has always been to put myself in the front lines and sacrifice myself rather than protect myself. But I do remember the relationship between a cassette tape and a pencil. I remember it quite clearly. So that does put me in that group, and we have a secure bubble that allows us to keep running the church online and everything. But that hasn't changed my inner relationship to what's going on. I mean, it's just given me a very stark, because I don't have outlets. I've never been much of a gad about, but I had my ways of distracting myself, many of which are not available to me anymore. Diana in India was talking about it. She had this wonderful phrase, I just don't do that anymore, is what she said about all the places she used to go and the things that she used to do. I've thought of it in terms of I've entered a monastery, which has very peculiar rules, but it's a different monastery from the one that I lived in before. But we've always been in that monastery. Once we became a disciple, this is what I've been reflecting on. Once I became a disciple, the first time I did the purification ceremony, I seek purification by the grace of God. The Master says, open your heart to me, and I will enter and take charge of your life. How much did I really mean that? Do I mean you can take charge of the things, these list of things that I'm going to surrender to you, and the rest of them I'll just keep? And with a whole list of justifications, including I don't want to bother you. I don't want to bother you, Master, But I don't want to give it to you because it frightens me to have to fly in the dark. And I love to imagine what it would feel like to be completely unafraid. Just completely. I had a very interesting, I guess I would call it a superconscious experience. It lasted barely as long as it's going to take me to describe it to you, maybe less. I was thinking about Swami's song, I Live Without Fear. And it was just, I was imagining the state of mind of Jesus. Or of Swamiji when he talked about having, at the end of his life, he had a dream in which he was going to be burned at the stake. His enemies had set it all up and tied him to the stake, and they piled all the wood around him, and the wood was beginning to smolder. And he said in the goofy way of dreams, the people who tied him to the stake were just across the room having dinner, just laughing and enjoying themselves, and then glancing over every once in a while to see how burning Kriyananda was going. But just before, and he was standing there and he was thinking, well, this will hurt. There'll be a little bit of pain here. But once the pain is over, I'll just be out of my body and it won't really make any difference. It won't last long. And he said he was completely calm. There wasn't anything in him that was asking for the situation to be different. And then he said just before the fire really got to him, his friends burst in, untied him and spirited him away. But he said what was most interesting to him in the dream was his inner attitude and his inner state of mind was exactly the same when he thought he would be burned as when he was rescued. There was no relief at being rescued, and there was no anxiety at being burned. This will hurt, but in the end it will be just fine again. Anyway, I was contemplating all of that and just literally trying to imagine what would it be like that no matter what God brought me, I wouldn't even flinch. And I was walking up the stairs, and for the span of about 3 steps, I felt that. And it was, well, I can't even say. It was so different than the level of egoic self-concern that I think of as normal. And it has been, ever since then, a tremendous incentive to tell me that even though I'm essentially quite a cheerful person, and I cope pretty well with stuff, I certainly have my days, but oh my, there's a whole world of freedom. And how many times have I prayed, God, thy will be done? How many times have I been in the purification and said, open your heart to me, and said, let Master take charge of my life. And you see, this is the fun of what's happening to us now. And this could be the fun if, depending on how much pancake batter it really does take to shingle our roofs, we can have a lot more opportunities. And the question is, are we going to anticipate it and at least inwardly doing our best to move toward it? Or are we going to just wait to be rescued? And maybe we'll be rescued. Maybe we'll get another interlude of relatively comfortable living. Or maybe not. that's part of it. Who knows? But I'm trying, and I'm trying to be happy about it. I mean, I'm not trying to be morose. I'm a little morose at the moment, but I mean, I don't mean morose. I'm serious at the moment. But it's nothing to be serious about, because think about it. If we all get to face and overcome our fears, then we're going to be a lot freer than we are now. And wouldn't that be a pleasant way to be? I mean, is this the apex of what we can imagine for ourselves? I mean, if this is it, this is really a disappointing story. I mean, this really can't be all there is. There has to be a lot more. So what a wonderful opportunity we have. And for this hour were we born. And Master came to do a very serious mission for the world. The Master sacrificed everything. You know, this then is the sacrifice that the great masters for the world make for the world. You know, they give up a life of infinite joy and freedom in God. This is what Swamiji gave his life for, is to help people, and to help people specifically in this transition. And all of us want to serve. And we can really serve. We can serve with our consciousness at the present moment. I mean, Eric, you mentioned just going and visiting people in their houses. What do we bring? I was reflecting recently. I've had the opportunity on a number of occasions to be present when someone was dying. And sometimes it was an Ananda person and everybody in the room had the same understanding. But often it wasn't. And I'm no expert. I can't go into the astral worlds, you know. I can't change someone's karma. I don't have anything like that. But I realized a lot of times, several of the times that I've been in a death room, is that my job was not to be afraid. Just because I wasn't afraid of someone dying. It's like they have to die. And if this is their time to die, let's all just kind of cheer them on. Let's not panic. But it was so dramatic to me what it meant to have someone in the room who wasn't afraid of the fact that this person was going to die. And I was extrapolating from that recently and thinking about the degree of anxiety that there is on the planet. I certainly feel it. It surrounds me. It's kind of like it's just on the other side of my aura, but it leaks into my aura, is how I would put it. And I was remembering how helpful it is to have somebody in the room who's not afraid. But of course, you can't be not afraid if you're afraid. So what a great practice. It's always been an incentive to me. What I feel now, partly because my life is restricted, it's sort of like it's gotten down to the essential element. And the essential element is so childish that all my thousands of hours of talking seem silly, except that's what it's about. Do I actually believe in God? Do I actually believe that I have a guru who's watching out for me? Do I actually believe that Divine Mother really loves us and is taking care of us? And of course, I can glibly answer yes to all of those, but if you wake me up from a dead sleep, what am I going to say? You know, if the building I'm in looks like it's going to fall on me, how do I think to protect myself? Or do I think to protect myself? You know, I'm sure many of you have heard this story, but I was enjoying it recently. Ananta, famous Ananta from Ananda villages, you know, he's a very courageous man. He's one of my big mentors in fearlessness. And when they took over the community that became the community in Sacramento, it was kind of a low-life place, and there were drug dealers and, as he put it in a rather tactful way, people who rented their rooms by the hour. But they were having to evict some people and there was this man who was a drug dealer, and he was going to have to leave, and he was real angry about having to leave. And he burst in on Ananda, and Ananda was sitting in the community office there, and he had a gun, presumably loaded. He pointed it right at Ananda's chest and threatened to shoot him because he was being evicted, and it made him mad. Ananda put his arms out like this and said, "Go ahead and shoot, but you're still going to get evicted." And I thought to myself, could I do that? Would I have the presence of mind to just look at who I'm looking at and realize this is the hand of death? And in a moment, I'll be in the astral world. There was a movie I saw about American Indians. It was one of those, absolutely heartbreaking ones where, one by one, all the Native Americans are killed and they're making their last desperate effort in the blizzard to escape from the awful white people. And it's just, very dramatic and terrible and true, unfortunately. And all through that, the hero of the story, I don't even remember anything more. Every so often he'd have this vision of this island in the middle of a river, and it would just come before him and it would go. It was just part of the plot. And then in this last, horrible effort through the blizzard, he suddenly comes to the edge of a river and there's the island. And when he actually sees it in life, it occurs to him that this is his death place. And what he'd been seeing all that time was the hour of his death. But what he laments is, oh, he said, if I'd only known that, he said, what a brave warrior I would have been. And that has also struck me. The hour of my death is not under my control, nor really is the expression of my karma. So how brave I would be if I really knew that. Because what would I have to be afraid of? So these are interesting to my mind, at least. These are my shelter in place meditations. The explosion in Beirut just helped made it more dramatic, because who expected that to happen? Who living in that city expected who that woman doctor, that was not how she expected her wedding day to go. Anything could happen to any of us at any point. Are we practicing, or are we just holding on, waiting to be rescued? Now, I'm going to add one more thing before we go into conversation. We also have to be exceedingly realistic. We have to just recognize, I was talking to a friend last night, between delusion and enlightenment, there are many vibrations of consciousness. And if you could actually put numbers on them, they have numbers, And Jesus was once a jiva who was trying to become enlightened. Yogananda was once a jiva trying to become enlightened. Yogananda says he remembers being a diamond. Now, to get from being a diamond to being Yogananda, you have to go through a lot of vibrations of consciousness, don't you? Which is to say, every master has been exactly like you and me. I mean, precisely in terms of vibration of consciousness, their unique expression of it would have been different. But if I'm a 761, between a million, which is enlightenment, and zero, which is total delusion, Master had to walk through being a 761. St. Francis had to walk through it. Swami Kriyananda had to walk through it. There's no way to get from 0 to a million, if those are the numbers, without going through 761, 10,006, 14,002. And so far from Divine Mother or Master being upset with us or expecting something else of us, they just take our hand and say, oh yeah, I remember 761. This is a tricky place. Yeah, you got to watch out for that. Be careful of this swamp. And whoops, you fell in that crevasse, didn't you? How are we going to get you out of there? So it's a fun game. It's a game to them. It's a big adventure. We're climbing Mount Everest together, and they know how to get there. And it takes a little more stamina and courage than we may have, but we're in really, really good company. We're walking a road where the footprints have been made by every great soul that has ever lived, and every great soul that will ever live, which includes us. So we don't know. We're flying, we're having to surrender to the wind, and we're having to fly in the darkness. We always are. It's just that the illusion of control and the illusion of being able to predict the future is a little less obvious than it has been. But this is where we've always been. And it could be a lot more fun, depending on how much courage we have now. In Swamiji's lessons in discipleship, courage is the first quality. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. So, any thoughts or comments or questions, whatever you like?
We do have a few questions in the chat box, and I'll just reiterate that you are welcome to put something in the chat box. You can either do it publicly or privately. If you do it publicly, just know we're on Facebook and that kind of thing. And if you can also ask questions straightforward too. But we'll start with what's in the chat box, if that is okay. It says, please read to Asha if you would. Asha, such love and blessings to you. Thank you so much for sharing so openly with us. 2 questions, please. Are you able to walk outdoors on the Ananda property, and can you walk with masks, socially distanced with another resident? Also, I sometimes receive teachings while in meditation, teachings in quote unquote, while in meditation, which seem important, but cannot remember them afterward. Can you please speak about that? Thank you, dear one.
No, I mean, I could go anywhere I want. I just have an agreement with my community to remain quite isolated. But yes, every time we step, yes, I can step outside the door. We have five beautiful acres here, so we're really in a wonderful place. I visited with Narayani and Shurjo, for example, in Mumbai, in their upper floor apartment, and I know what they have, and they don't have anything compared to what I have, because we have this beautiful place, and I can walk through the neighborhood, and I drive to our temple every once in a while, but I'm always masked. We try to keep the community masked. People are actually pretty cooperative. We went through a period of total rebellion where nobody wanted to do anything. And a lot of us, including me, misbehaved really badly. And then I realized I was acting like a 4-year-old, but I was just mad. We were all mad. So we did that for about 3 days, angry, I mean. Then we got our heads back on, so that we've been pretty careful ever since. So my life is actually not that different than it was before, except the other day when I just was really annoyed and I wanted to get in my car and go to my favorite restaurant and sit at the counter and read the newspaper and have breakfast. But I mean, that's not suffering. That's barely an inconvenience. So that's the level that I'm living on at the moment. As for knowing things and then not knowing things, you see, it's all about vibration of consciousness. And when we have a certain vibration of consciousness, we will then be able to pick up certain thoughts. That's exactly what Master says. Thoughts are not individual, they're universal. So when our vibration of consciousness changes, then we understand things that we didn't understand. And we completely understand them. But then our vibration of consciousness is not consistent. And we lose that sensitivity. And when we lose that sensitivity, we lose the thought too. But what we have to understand is that we are so much more than what we are consciously aware of at any moment. I mean, we are actively operating from much more than what we are consciously aware of at any moment. The superconscious is always pushing and influencing us. And so what we know and who we are huge gaps. So every time your vibration shifts enough, our vibration shifts enough to have a perception that we haven't had before, that perception stays with us. Swamiji once said something very interesting to me. I think how he put it exactly. He talked about his soul consciousness, I think that was the word he used. The soul consciousness versus what the ego was aware of. Because, for example, Master stated to Swamiji that he was already self-realized, he just didn't know it. What on earth does that mean? Ramakrishna said the same thing to Vivekananda. He gave Vivekananda an experience. Ramakrishna was an avatar in the 1800s. Vivekananda was his most well-known disciple. He gave Vivekananda an experience of his true self. Vivekananda went into that state and expected to stay there forever. His guru brought him back out of it, said, I'm taking the key to that and I'm putting it in my pocket and I'm going to keep it in my pocket. And then Vivekananda was not able to access that state. I don't know. But Ramakrishna took it away from him. And Swamiji made that statement. He said, Master told me that I'm already self-realized, but I just don't know it. Now, Master also said death will be your final sacrifice, and that, you will be free in this lifetime. But all of it, it's totally confusing. I have no idea what any of it means. It's just there it all is. But Swami also said what he was experiencing was that the gap between his ego and his soul was conscious of much more than his ego was, but gradually his ego was being informed of what his soul already knew. That the gap between them was beginning to close. And he told me that like 1972. There was just more integrated awareness. I don't think it was increased realization. I mean, the way he put it is that it wasn't like he was increasing his realization, he was just becoming more aware of his realization. None of which I can speak from experience, but it also speaks to the fact that every so often we get to know more of who we are than we know at the moment. Because karma, destiny, physical bodies, I don't know what keeps it covered. When Bella Padapavskaya died, she was Bella Bingham by then, Swami remarked, more than most people, he said, most of Bella was not present. Most of her was still on some other plane. And she was the sister of Maria, Dave Warner's wife. And Maria, who'd knew her better than anyone, said, how did Swami know that? Because she said that was sort of what it was about Bella. She only brought a piece of her with her. The rest of it she left somewhere else. Again, I'm not quite sure what that means, but I think that's true for all of us to a large extent.
Okay.
Interesting question.
Do we want to take a question from outside the chat box? Does anybody have something that they, otherwise we'll go back to the chat box. Anybody want to?
I have something.
Okay.
I just want, it's Mike Wolverton, Asha. Nayaswami. I just wanted to tell everybody, and there's a lot of people on this call who are serving and who are helping people be aware of super consciousness, that it's doing a whole lot of good. And it's almost a unique opportunity from our particular lifestyle situation right now to that everybody is gaining so much from. I've gone to your Friday evening classes. I've gone to a lot of things that are offered at Ananda Dallas. I've gone to incredible number of opportunities at Ananda Village. Well, the online, everybody, I would encourage everybody to get online for Ananda Village, $180 a year, it's worth it. And taken all these classes that I've been taking, and it's just a beautiful period really in terms of, on all levels, causal, astral, material, for a lot of people. And everybody who's serving, there's just a lot of progress being made. I want to thank you in particular.
Well, I'm very impressed by how Ananda has risen to the occasion. We're well trained. Many years ago, when in the year 2001, when we were at that point 11 years into the litigation with SRF that went on for another year after that, and the inspiration came to have a group of us go down to the SRF convocation and actually demonstrate, whatever you called it. It was educate was the phrase we preferred. Educate the SRF members because they didn't know this litigation was going on. Swami was very, very ambivalent about whether or not we should do it. And when I finally asked him, because I was one of the movers to make that thing happen, I said, what are you worried about, sir? He says, I'm afraid you'll become angry. And if anger entered into the equation, that would be spiritually disastrous. I said, first I said, sir, you vastly underestimate your training of us. And he said, you're naive, Asha. He said, no, the conversation went differently. I said, why would we become angry? He said, you're naive, Asha. He said, if it's a confrontation, he said, people become angry. Oh, Swamiji, we don't intend to confront anybody. We're going to stand on the sidewalk and sing, which is exactly what we did. We just chanted and sang Swami's songs. I said, we're there to educate, not to confront. But then I said, sir, you vastly underestimate your training of us. And we made a deal, which was that we were allowed to go. But if even one person became angry, we promised him we would just fold up and come home no matter what. And no one did. One person became slightly annoyed, but they realized that they pulled back before they did. But the end of it was, I'm watching Ananda at this point, and I mean Ananda everywhere. We're very well trained. Master and Swami have trained us extremely well. And it also, it's not merely that we're trained, it's that we're riding a ray of grace. And that ray of grace is accessible to us because for this hour were we born. For this hour were we always born. But sometimes when things get more dramatic, you notice a little bit stronger. But everything that is needed for us to ride that wave of grace, including the wave of grace, is within us. It's just a question of where we turn our attention. So yes, yes, yes to all of that.
Thank you.
So we have a question in the chat box. I think we'll go to the chat box here, and it's a long one, and I haven't fully read it. But you always attract real challenging questions, Asha. The bird in the darkness has to use the pineal gland to guide its way, completely shutting down the five senses using intuition. And the abilities to perceive the electromagnetic torus fields, bulls are torus. Did you know you can take a homing pigeon from its cage anywhere in the world, put him in a box, and transport him anywhere in the world? That pigeon can be let out of the cage anywhere in the world and find its way back to its home cage. That is the ability we are trying to develop in our meditation times. The Native Americans wear feathers on their heads. The Egyptians worship Horus and Thoth, head of birds. That is what everyone is saying. The question I have is, how do you, in meditation, go breathless and escape the five physical senses? When Swami taught you to go breathless, how do you overcome the five senses? Is there higher teachings than Kriya, the College for Advanced Devotees? He says he has to go somewhere, but God bless you all.
Whoever you are. Okay, let me.
It's a long one.
That's all right. The bird in the Festival of Light is an allegory. Bird is symbolic. We're not really talking about birds. There are, at the same time, sometimes Swami talks about birds. Birds sing of freedom as they soar lightly on the air. So may our hearts soar high above all curbs and cares. That's in the song that he wrote about nature, the Nature Channel song, where he sings to the rivers and the forest. Swami actually said, and I wrote this into Lightbearer, that attunement with nature and seeing God in nature, Swami said, is characteristic of this soil, of this world, this land mass that we live on. He said it's not unique to the USA, but it's definitely a characteristic of where we live. And it was planted in us by the Native Americans because their expression of Sanatana Dharma was deeply integrated with the natural world. And their practices, which some you can still get remnants of it, but it's a hard, almost an impossible teaching to follow now, because it's simply not possible to live that integrated with the natural world unless you really go somewhere into the wilderness, because airplanes and electronic waves and all of the different things that move, the natural world isn't the same as it was. Plus, we're just highly insulated from it. So it's harder for us to practice. But that doesn't mean all of the practices that they did are not valid or weren't valid. But I don't think that's what Swami is talking about when he's talking about the little bird there. The other part of it is, it's a little simpler than the question is being asked. I mean, and it really just is about loving and trusting God. And Swami didn't teach us to go breathless. Swamiji gave us the way to be attuned with God. And whether or not a person goes breathless and transcends the five senses, what are we trying to do? I mean, what is the defined goal? We had this discussion in our community not long ago. It's like someone just said, Kriya practice is the heart of what we're doing. And then the alternative thought was raised, no, actually it isn't. Being attuned to God is the heart of what we're doing. And Kriya will help you to be attuned to God. But we actually get very confused if we say things like, even like transcending the five senses and all of these different things. Those are the consequences of. And yes, the practices that we do, so it's a yes and no answer, but the practices that we do, we focus on those things. We try hard to transcend, but devotion is the greatest power, especially, as Swami said, in this age. And if we express our devotion in different ways, and a good way to think about devotion is, what am I devoted to? So we don't just think about devotion as emotion, as as chanting or weeping or wailing and praying. I mean, some people might not be inclined that way, but they can be deeply devoted. And that is what we're looking for. What am I devoted to? And you can be deeply devoted to your Kriya practice, but why? Why are you devoted to your Kriya practice? What is it about your Kriya practice that calls forth your devotion? And in all cases, it's the opportunity to transcend everything. But if the heart is not engaged in that effort to transcend, you can't be taught how to go breathless. You can be taught ways that will help you to experience the presence of God, which will cause you to transcend the need to breathe. But it's far more effective if we keep focused on what the real goal is. And no, nobody's keeping any secrets from you. When I was a child, and the purpose of life, it seemed so important to me to find the purpose of life, and nobody around it seemed to have a clue. I had this idea that they did know, and that just when I got to a certain age, they would call me into a room and everybody would say, ha ha, good joke. Here's what the real meaning of life is. And it was a matter of no small concern to me that as I got older, I realized that they didn't know. I mean, my parents were good people. They were not foolish by any means, but they didn't know. My teachers didn't know. I finally got to the university. They didn't know. Just nobody knew until I was handed a book by Vivekananda, and he knew. And then I met Swami, and he knew. But nobody within Ananda is keeping secrets from you. And this question, although it's not exactly phrased that way, reminds me of a very dear friend of mine who sat in my classes for 20 years and always was asked very good questions, many of them. He finally moved to another colony, so I lost his charming presence, and I enjoyed his presence. But I realized that a great many of his questions were the same question. Is there an easier way? Is there some secret you're not telling me? Is it time for you to reveal the shortcut? Am I grown up enough that you'll take me into the room and tell me how this is really done? No, actually not. It's just you have what you have. We use it as well as we can. That's what I was talking about in the first part. It's like, what do I actually believe? I don't want to fool myself with clever words. It's if somebody wakes me up in the middle of the night, what will I instinctively declare to be reality? And whatever gap there is between my aspiration and my instantaneous response. I had one moment, it was actually, speaking of litigation, it was when we had the second lawsuit in which they were trying to accuse us of sexual harassment, being an abusive cult and all of that. It was just such a fabric of lies, but it was so preposterous that we didn't take it seriously, which was, of course, our undoing. We had no concept. We were naive. We were super naive. But by the end, by the time the jury verdict was coming, we were pretty sure we were going to get creamed. And so I was sitting in the courtroom, and the jury comes back, and they announce the verdict. And this woman, his name for her last name was Bertolucci. She was sitting there. And in the moment that I realized that we had been judged guilty and we're going to have to pay all this money and it was just going to be this big mess, my first thought, seriously, and I'm so proud of myself, I felt so badly for her. I really did. I thought, oh my God, not only did she perpetuate this horrible thing against people who are probably the best friends she's ever had in the world, including Swami Kriyananda, but she's won. And so that means it's just going to be so much longer before she ever gets this thing straightened out. And I thought she's going to have to suffer a lot for this, because this was really a bad thing that she did. But at the same time, I was so pleased because I didn't think of myself at all. That was one of my best, wake me up in the middle of the night and see what I do. And it was, instead of anger, disappointment, fear, I just really felt sorry for her, and I still do. I have no idea what happened to her. But let's see, what was that? What was I answering? I was talking about the bird. Yeah, it's just like, it just comes down to stuff like that. It doesn't come down to anything except, what do I think is real? What is my vibration of consciousness? And how can I refine it? We're not meditating. We're not Himalayan yogis. It's like none of us, looking at all of you, thinking of myself, none of us are isolated in a cave. Everybody. Eric Shaw talks about going out to restaurants, and Eric Biscamp talks about going out and appraising homes, and God knows I'm a busy little beaver myself. I'm not just sitting there. I'm not just sitting there transcending myself. It's not my karma. So we have to think about the spiritual path in a much broader way. And even Master himself, he brought it in a broader way. He brought it out of the monasteries. He wanted spiritual communities for householders. Even in Autobiography of a Yogi, provided that the householder maintains a certain mental detachment, it's the higher path. He didn't even say it was an equal path. He said it was the higher path, involvement in the world. So if we're going to be involved in the world, we can't just be thinking about transcending the senses, else we'll just, stumble into the street and get run over by a car. We have to participate a little bit more. So.
All right. Well, I want to say something real quick here. We are going to go till about 1 o'clock because we are going to have Asha come back in a few weeks. And if you have any ideas on, or suggestions for the topic of when she comes back and does a workshop, feel free to put them in the chat box before you leave, if you have to leave before we're done here today. I just want to mention that. And then there is a quick question here in the chat box. I believe the Warriors of Light meditation is one of the most important things Ananda has done. Do you think they will continue after August?
It's not my decision, so I really have no idea.
Okay.
I think that You can take the flame of that, absolutely take the flame of it and continue to use it. Yeah, it's glorious. It's a glorious idea. We have a lot of power together. We have a lot of power together and we ought to use it. Sometimes we don't remember how much power we have. We need to use it. Exactly.
Okay. Is anybody want to ask a question from live on camera, or should we go to the next?
I have a question, and it has to do a lot with, like, say, I go into like 5 homes a day, and I've done that for the last 140 days of the lockdown. It's just I'm wearing a mask, the people there are wearing a mask. But I see 5 times as many people because they're all home, and people that used to go to work, they're all handling stuff from home, and it's a totally different view of life. I see the families, I see their interactions, the kids who look up at me and they're real persons and I'm a real person. I'm protecting them with my mask, or they're protecting me by wearing theirs. It's an intimate feeling in a lot of ways that our world has come to. And things like this, I never got a chance to look at all your faces for so long, because I'm looking in the gallery view and I can see Mike and I can see, yes, I can see Sonia. It's really sweet in that way. But what I'm realizing is that we're looking for who to listen to in some sense. There's very little people that we trust government-wise, and the information conspiracy theory to people that we feel are real. We're having to feel consciousness. Is this person's consciousness like Fauci? Or we're having to go beyond the conspiracy theories to really, what is it that I trust about that person, the way they're talking and the way they feel? And it's, I think everybody's becoming a little bit more sensitive to not just the information, but who's saying it. And I was wondering if you had a sense of that sensitivity.
My whole spiritual life has been about what is the source. Whenever I hear anything, I always ask the question, what is the source? I mean, if it's something I can't verify or experience or think about myself, I mean, I've always been that way. Who said it? Merely because it was said or it was channeled from the other side or whatever. If it's not something I can verify, I really want to know who said it, because otherwise I'm just a ping pong ball, just being thrown from edge to edge. And Swamiji talked about that when he was at first a young monk in Mount Washington, and his entire world had been just completely turned upside down, and everything sounded preposterous to him. But when people would say anything, he would ask, because Mount Washington was not at all focused. It wasn't like SRF now. It was just a big boarding house where all these people were coming in and out. And so sometimes people said really wacky things. People were into lots of stuff. And Swami would always ask, did Master say it? And no matter how preposterous it sounded, there's no masters inside of Mount Washington, but there have Mount Shasta, but there have been colonists. That was an actual statement of masters. And Swami would just have to put it on the shelf and just accept that it was true, because he knew that Master was truthful and that was what he had to go on. The problem in our society right now is, we're relying on people whose character we really don't know. When I moved from Ananda Village to Ananda Palo Alto, and I lived in Ananda Village for 16 years, and even though by the last 5 or 6 years, I was traveling a lot, that was still my home. We didn't have a community here in Palo Alto yet. We rented a home, rented just somebody's house. And I remember that somebody came to cut the grass, and they were, this is going to sound really normal to all of you. Somebody came to cut the grass. I looked out the back window, and there was a person about 4 feet away from me on the other side of the glass. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know his name. I didn't know his family. I didn't know if he had children. I didn't know what his story was. I didn't know him. And I realized, of course, we're not in Kansas anymore. We're like somewhere else. We've left Ananda Village. But the great problem with our society, which is why the small community solution will help, is we really don't know the character of anybody. We know what they present, and then nowadays we know what the horrible dirt is that somebody's trying to get us to believe about them. But we really are at sea in terms of actually knowing who people are, because we just simply can't. So some kind of intuition has to come into play, whether it's the sound of the voice, which is, of course, a very telling reality, a source that we actually believe that we can trust, something that matches our own experience, common sense. My particular point of view, Swami was very radical in some of his beliefs about things. He subscribed to several what people would really call lunatic fringe newsletters. And there was even a period of time when he dutifully passed them on to all the colony leaders. And every week, we get a few dozen pages of these really far out, just politically and even religiously, economically, really far out newsletters. I always thoroughly enjoyed them because I didn't have any stake in any of it. I thought it was fun. Swami's explanation was they have news in them that doesn't appear anywhere else. I mean, the internet wasn't quite as avid at that point, and Swami didn't use it as much. And he was, he often said, you're naive. You really don't understand how power works in this world and how people who want power work with it, because we're babes in the woods with stuff like that. In the 2016 election, when I was watching that election, because I knew a little bit about this from living with Swami, who was a king and a master politician, I realized that the man who won, I usually don't say his name, the man who's presently the president, he understood mob psychology. Yeah. And we had all these brilliant intellectuals who didn't know anything about human nature. And this other man completely understood mob psychology, and he was running circles around people. And the fact that he won was not surprising to me. And still, we have that certain gap, which is, you have a certain group of people who have this idea about how things should be, and then you have mob psychology. And Swami himself talked about President Obama, and he said he's a very good man. And then he commented about some speech he gave for the Middle East or something. So it was a brilliant speech. It was extremely well reasoned. It has nothing to do with what's going on over there. He said Obama does not understand, the psychology of people. He said it's an unfortunate trait in a world leader not to understand that. So we are really caught up in times when we are sharing the planet with some really bad people, just really bad people. And they've been allowed to incarnate because the transition between yugas is a time when people get to destroy. And so there's a lot of, and it has to be said, God's children who need the opportunity to destroy. And God has brought them here to destroy. And what the karma of the planet is, or the karma of the country is, Swami remarked many times, he said, national leaders do not create the karma of the country. They get into that position because it's the karma of the country to have those leaders. So we don't know what the karma of the country and the karma of the world is right now. So, and I think any wacky theory might be true at this point. I don't necessarily believe the most wacky theories, and I do exactly, what you're suggesting, Eric. Somebody sends me I don't really watch everything that comes, but if I get something that's pretty far out from somebody who I know is not a nutcase themselves, I get regular emails from someone who's just, with all due respect, a nutcase, so I don't even read his emails, but some of my really good friends send me really wacky things. But sometimes it starts immediately, and I immediately see intellectual dishonesty, and I hear somebody with a horrible voice, and I'll think, no, I'm not going to follow that one. I don't think so. But mostly, I feel like I don't think anybody but Babaji knows, quite honestly. I think fortunately Babaji does know, and I think that the masters are pulling the strings, and they're using a lot of these folks. So I feel I don't need to know. I can be an interested observer, and I pay attention for this reason, because maybe at some point I will really have to do something different than I'm doing. So I pay attention to that extent, but I don't pay attention to try to make sense out of it. Because there's just, everybody's selfish and nobody believes in God. The problem here is nobody believes in God. They use God, they flash the Bible around sometimes, but they don't believe in Sanatana Dharma. They don't believe in Satchidananda. They don't believe that you are a part of all that is. And, you know, and so we're just not living on the same, we're not operating according to the same premises.
Right.
So I don't even know what they're, you know, they'll make decisions that are just not my decisions. And Babaji's put them in charge, so they get to. I mean, I will vote this time. I feel that there's some scoundrels that I would really like to vote against. But I'm not necessarily voting for very many because it's just scoundrel against scoundrel. I may have shared with you what Swamiji and Sant Kesavadas talked about many years ago. Darkness will fight with darkness. Did I say that here? That before there is a final, Sant Kesavadas was an Indian spiritual teacher, and he and Swamiji had lunch together at Crystal Hermitage when this would have been the 80s, the 90s. I fixed lunch for them, sat at the lunch table with others, and they talked about the end of, you know, they talked about Master's predictions, the prophecies, all of that. And together, this was the fascinating thing they said. Before there is a final confrontation between light and darkness, darkness will fight with itself. And darkness will fight with itself for a long time, and until it is weak enough, until it is weakened, and then there will be a real light and darkness confrontation, where there'll be a clear expression of righteousness. And instead of a, you know, there's a clear expression of darkness, but the expression of righteousness is also a little fuzzy, because there's a lot of self-interest and a lot of politics and a lot of God knows what. I mean, Shurjo said when this all started, no human being could flip the world around in a matter of a week. He said only Babaji could do it. And I've held to that. I thought that was a brilliant way to put it. And no normal human could write the chaotic script we're living in right now. With all of the characters, I think a lot of the time, my gosh, writers and historians and journalists are gonna you know, go out to dinner on this for decades when it's finally over, because it is such a story. My word. And we don't know the half of it when the backstories start coming out.
Yeah.
So yes, we have to use our common sense. And I think we have to be careful not to get too committed to any scenario other than Divine Mother. We can watch the plot. We can be fascinated by the plot and really interested in the dramatist. But I think we have to be a little careful not to become too rabidly committed to any point of view other than God is in charge. That would be my suggestion. Because every time I've seen people really deeply committed, I'm not sure, but you know, some people do. I know some of my naturopathic friends are quite irate about medical things, and I bet they're right.
Okay, we have another question in the chat box. I spend a lot of time with animals. My relationship to them is helpful during this time. Could you speak a little about the relationship between people and animals and how the two species help each other's karma?
Well, first I have to say that I don't spend a lot of time with animals, so I'm not really going to answer you as someone who lives in that world, because I don't. But I know it in a somewhat general way. First of all, Master said it's very, very good karma for animals to spend time with humans because it greatly accelerates their evolution. And he even said that Dr. Lewis's cat would be born as a person. So what may sometimes seem like a sentimental idea that my cat's going to be a person, Master at least verified that. And there's an incredible story about Ramana Maharshi and the cow named Lakshmi, and how the cow was liberated. They have a Mahasamadhi Mandir. They have a little temple dedicated to the cow, Lakshmi, because Ramana Maharshi said she was liberated. I will actually send to you, because I have a link to one of his devotees telling the story. It's just a mind-blowing, fabulous story. The end of that story is that it was pretty much understood that there had been this peasant woman who lived on the mountain there where Ramana Maharshi had his ashram, and that when Ramana Maharshi was living alone in the cave, she used to feed him. She used to feed him. She used to bring him food and cook for him and help take care of him. And then she died. And he says it was commonly understood in the ashram that this cow was her. And the reason she'd incarnated as a cow is that she had more access to the guru as a cow than any other disciple did. Because the cow had complete free range in the ashram and was allowed to walk right into the meditation hall and sit down right next to Ramana Maharshi, and he would sit there with his hand on her head. And no other disciple had a privilege like that. And she didn't have any responsibilities. And when after she had her multiple calves, she would just give them away. She didn't have to raise them and take care of them. So it's quite a story. So that's an interesting comment. Ramana Maharshi also, just by the way, he always felt in any dispute between the ashram residents and the native animals that lived there, he always favored the animals. He said it was their home first and we invaded them, so we have to work around them rather than us having to work around them having to work around us. That was interesting. Swami Kriyananda, however, freely squashed spiders, and he sprayed against ants. He never tried to keep, he never was exaggerated in that. And Master, as you know, talked about killing mosquitoes and things like that. However, having said that, I think all sentient beings are expressions of God, and animals are individual souls, at a certain vibration. They might only be at 531 compared to your 762 or something like that. But Swamiji said to me at one point, he said, I've come to the point, he said, where I see all beings, including animals, he said, is just somewhere on the spectrum between egotism and enlightenment. And he said, they're just, you go down the human spectrum and you cross over into animal bodies because you have the body that is sufficiently evolved for you to express your consciousness. And once that body no longer is capable of allowing you to express the full dimension of your consciousness, you shed it and get another one. So a cat has a limited capacity. A human being has a greater capacity, but a cat can be extremely highly evolved inside that cat body. And also, of course, you have this odd idea of creatures going back and forth. Gyanananda, who was a disciple of Master, a Swiss man, who walked from Switzerland to India and then spent the rest of his life in India. At the end of his life, he had this ashram up in Dehradun, and he had this exceedingly obnoxious little dog that he called Dharma, after the dog that followed Yudhishthira, the first of the Pandavas, up to heaven. The dog had been delivered to the ashram in a taxi cab. A taxi just drove up and opened the door, and some unknown person had sent the dog to Gyanananda, and he felt obligated to take care of it. He took care of it till the end of its life, and it was just a tiny yapping, snapping little thing that you just be there in the ashram. I wasn't there that much after he came, and you'd always have to be careful lest the thing nipped at your ankles, and then he would yap all the time. But other people who knew it better told me that it was a fallen human being who yet had the good karma to get back to a saint. And the dog refused to eat when anybody was watching. And Gyanananda said it was because he was so embarrassed, because he just had to stick his snout into whatever he was eating. And it was so demeaning to him that he had to either eat in total privacy or they had to put a screen up in front of him or else he just wouldn't eat. Now, that's one. The other side of it, and this goes back to the Native Americans. When I lived at Ananda Village, and more recently when I was in seclusion writing Light Bear, because I've lived in Palo Alto for all these years, and I was way out in the wilderness, more wilderness areas. I mean, everything spoke to me. Every creature that came, everything was a clear voice of the infinite. There's no question about it. And being out there like that, I just remembered being a Native American And I remembered how we all just walked in harmony, and every aspect of creation was talking. And that, of course, is the tradition of the Native Americans. They didn't make all these distinctions between human and non-human. It was just all of God's creatures moving together. And that is the truth. We've just, I mean, among the millions of reasons why the world is in so much trouble is that we've forgotten all of that. So I think anyone who's called to be a link between the animal and the human world, I think it's a high destiny, and one should take it seriously. You know, it isn't for everyone, but those for whom it is true, it's a very honorable service. And I would carry it out as I would carry out any other service. Of course, human bodies are more valuable than animal bodies. So there are times when animals have to be sacrificed, and Master said that was true, that the potential of a human body is more valuable, and that animals don't have the same egoic involvement with their bodies. And many who understand these things say that the animals really only mourn their death because it hurts their people. But if their people are not hurt, they let it go. I mean, even as a devotee, you would. But the ego development is not so great. They recognize. Besides, I mean, it's fun being a dog, but how much fun can it be, really? You know, just to keep jumping off the couch and being so excited because we're going out for a walk and then sniffing everything. I mean, it's a limited existence. You really wouldn't want them to have to just do it forever. There's many fine features, but you just don't have access to much. I realized one day when a dog gets to be a service dog or a seeing eye dog or even a police dog or, a cadaver sniffing dog, it must be such a relief to have meaningful work. I mean, if you're smart enough to do that work, you must be just bored silly, sitting on the couch waiting for the kibble to be put into the bowl. So at the same time, when our animals want to get out of their animal bodies, I think we need to bless them and give them the chance to get more opportunity. But I've never been as involved with animals as other people are, so I know that's not so easy if it's been your friend your whole life.
Do you know, I just wanted to say something. Shakti and I used to have a cat, and this cat would always look, we wouldn't let it go out the door, but it used to look at us and just disgust. I mean, I could feel its consciousness going, I can handle myself out there. I have my own choices. I can't tell you how real this cat's consciousness was. And it's a look at me, and finally it got away, and I'm sure it was happy.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I think cats can be a little different sometimes in their ability to have a little more freedom. At least we have 3 cats, and one of them, they all could have access to the outdoors, but only one chooses it, and he seems like a pretty happy cat. We have often thought, well, we try not to give this too much energy. We thought, that cat's really got a pretty good life. But at any rate, we've gotten a lot out of our little cats. Our cats are furry friends. So, all right. So we don't have any more questions in the chat box. I'll take one more just to see if anybody else, Supriya, do you want to say anything, or you have a question for Asha? Anybody else is the put on the checkerboard or whatever you call it, gallery view. How about Pam and Sam? Do you have anything you just say hi there? Our friends from Scotts Valley.
We would really love to say hi and welcome Elaine and Beverly and Yudhishthira and Sean, our friends from Scotts Valley. It was wonderful to see everybody, all these wonderful names joined us this morning. We, unfortunately, are dealing with AT&T events this morning. Our internet has gone down 3 times since the conversation started. So if there is a prayer to the internet gods, please start praying it for us. But it was lovely seeing you, Asha, and being with our friends. Um, it it's joy. It's a joy. I love Dwapara. It is growing and it's getting stronger, and I'm trying to think of a nice word for the Kali hangover to be leaving soon. So thank you all.
Soon compared to eternity, soon compared to my lifetime, soon compared to next week. I don't know.
Yeah, we've really enjoyed our friends from Scotts Valley who have joined us for many activities, and we have a wonderful relationship between the two sanghas that's very supportive, and and that's what's so great about this spiritual family too. I mean, you're coming on, we have other people. You just, in so many ways, I think we feel more connected, even though
Exactly.
we can't have the physical. And there's so much support. And Master is flowing through so many of our Guru Bhais to support us virtually and energetically. And I couldn't be more grateful for this spiritual family, the Master and Swamiji, especially at this time.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're cursed to live in interesting times.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we're ready to just wrap it up.
Did you want to remind people one more time if they have a suggestion for a topic for Asha's workshop?
You can remind them.
Okay, one more time, last call for anybody who might have a suggestion of what you'd like Asha to talk about in the workshop that we're doing. It's the first time we've done a workshop like this, where we don't know where the topic is. But if you have any suggestions, go ahead and put them in the chat window, and we'll take all that under advisement.
Yeah, I can't quite remember right offhand the time frame that we outlined. Do you remember, Supriya?
Well, I have put the date in the chat box. The date is Saturday, August the 22nd. I have not heard anything about a time, so that's going to be worked out between us and Asha. See what the time. So when you can put that in there too. Do you have a preference? Let's just not do preferences. Let's do, if you absolutely cannot do a morning, let us know what, try to be open, and we're going to kind of bring it all together to see what is the best time frame. But Saturday, August 22nd is the date.
Did you, Asha, have again, I haven't gone back and reviewed our emails, but I can't remember if you stipulated a time frame on that Saturday or not.
Well, we talked about 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever you wanted to do. I mean, we can do whatever you want. I mean,
Yeah, but I mean in terms of like how it works on your end time-wise, like not before a certain.
the whole day is unbooked.
Okay. All right. Well, we will get back to you very soon about that.
Can I say one quick thing? I want to throw in my suggestion even before. It's just, listened to Light Bearer, and I also recently read My Heart Remembers, and they brought Swami Kriyananda to life like I've never. I mean, it's like, I can feel it in my heart as opposed to in my head. And that kind of day-to-dayness of their life has filled me more than anything else. And I think there's a day-to-day life of Yogananda that could be talked about that is as instructive as any of the teachings. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I wish there were books like that. Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
My Heart Remembers and The Light Bearer were both like that for me. But
I meant about Yogananda. Yeah.
oh yeah, I got you.
Yeah, but I do understand what you're saying exactly.
Okay. Well, again, thank you, Asha. It's always a great blessing when you join us, and we are consoled by the fact that just in a couple weeks we will be blessed to have you again. And
On the basis of what Eric said, I don't know if Light Bearer itself could be a topic, but we might. I mean, we could go through. I could go through and just come with significant moments or significant things like that. I don't know if that would be interesting to people or not, but it's a thought.
well, certainly would be for me.
Be interesting to me.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there'd be a lot of openness to that. So,
And of course, there's a lot of teaching in there and a lot about.
oh,
Yeah, I could just
Yeah.
skim through it, and/or those of you who've read it could point out pages or years that you would like me to comment more about. That would work.
Well, and also just applying it. I mean, the greatness of what Swamiji was to show us how to be that. That, or at least that's part of my take on it. So all of what you said, massaging it, see how Master guides you to, how can we also in these interesting times and in normal times, I mean, or just in any time, as a devotee, as the one who wants to know God. I think it's you just have such a huge stage here. We'll see where it goes. It's exciting.
We could do it around that if you'd like. I think that could work. Why don't you all think about it and we could do it around that, around the book, using it one way or another with requests specifically if you have them, and if not, I'll just turn the pages and pull out things on the basis of what Supriya was saying. If that sounds like a good idea, why don't you think about it and then let me know.
I think it sounds like a great
I
idea,
like
but
it.
we'll confirm it in the next day or so.
Okay, that works
And
with
go
me.
from there. So again, thank you so much. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you everybody for joining us. And we hope to see you next Sunday too, or during the week. Bye-bye.